In discussing the need last week for us to fully embrace step 3, for those of you who are unfamiliar with step 3 of the 12 steps, it says this: we made a decision to turn our will and our lives over to the care of God as we understood Him. In doing that, I made reference to parts in the biblical book of Joshua, chapters 3 and 4, where the children of Israel, on the literal brink of the promised land, had to negotiate the crossing of the Jordan River at flood stage. And not only trust God that He'd provide a way through and over in the face of seemingly impossible odds, but also upon the successful completion of the mission, were to memorialize His faithfulness to them, not only for the bolstering of their current generation's faith, but for future ones as well. If you recall, that's where they were instructed while God was still holding the waters of the Jordan back. Okay, 12 elders, each from each of the 12 tribes. Go in, pick up a stone, a boulder from the riverbed, bring it up onto the bank, construct basically a big pile of rocks, I guess, as a memorial. Okay, something to remember that by. Furthermore, I made reference to not only God's faithfulness to them in their past needs, including other impossible odds dealing with the cutting-edge might of that day's superpower, Egypt, food and water in barren desert conditions, as well as other needs. I also brought up my own more mundane crisis of faith having to do with advancement in God's purposes for my own life and difficulties I encountered at Army Airborne School. I did caution us here that the heroes of these accounts, both biblically and myself, were neither the children of Israel nor me in our quote, heroic, close quote, faith. No, absolutely not. Understand, the stories are not related to make the people themselves look bigger. Okay? The hero is always the God of our understanding. Always. But the good part is we get to be the beneficiaries of that. And that ought to be good enough for the likes of you and me. But I believe I need to double down on that lesson. And today's passage from Mark seems just the thing. Here we see Jesus' disciples unable to cast out the demons afflicting this dad's son with dumbness, and his plea to Christ for deliverance and cure. His request was preceded with the phrase, "if you can." Honestly, I believe this man's qualified plea is far more typical of the kind of faith most of us exhibit than some sort of, again, heroic faith that is often marketed from pulpits, on TV, and otherwise. You see, I so very much identify with this dad's response to Jesus' gentle rebuke. I believe. Help my unbelief. Get that, folks. I believe. Help my unbelief. Maybe that's not you, but that sure is me. And what about you? Do you have that kind of faith that always believes unwaveringly? Admittedly, there are some folks who seem to have a stronger gifting in this than others. Maybe you've run into them. Maybe you're one of those. Excellent. Wonderful. I'm glad. But none of us has it all the time. None of us believes God as He deserves. Nobody. So I can exhort you about the need to fully embrace step 3, to completely turn your lives and wills over to the care of God as you understand Him. But since I'm somewhat Eeyore-ish, you remember the character from Winnie the Pooh, that everything was always going wrong? The proverbial glass for me is not only half empty, typically, but leaky on top of it. What happens when you and I fail in that belief? What happens when, like the Father here in Mark 9, we have some belief, but it's laced with at least a little bit of doubt? Because, I'm committed to the 12 steps, and I'll never fail ever again. Right? So if I fail, I'll despair and despise myself, punishing myself for my lack of gratitude to God my inability to believe like I should, self-punishment, beating myself up endlessly is the key, right? Then what? I'll likely further isolate, and the likelihood of relapse into my addiction becomes all the greater. The kind of resolution that stakes its hope on so-called heroic, perfect faith carries with it the seeds of its own destruction. As the guy they say I look like is fond of asking, so how's that working for you? This kind of scenario has played itself out time and again, as those of us who have relapsed into habitually unhealthy behaviors can attest to. But I'm neither advising us to embrace heroic faith, nor on the other extreme to despair of all success, mere victims of our addiction. You and I understand there are some failures, while God is perfectly able and willing to forgive, carry with them temporal consequences we'd all prefer to avoid. It's just that heroic faith is not the key. It's not what we're trying to communicate here. What I am exhorting all of us here to do, whether you're in recovery from alcohol, drugs, or some other drug that may not come in a bottle, is the kind this dad revealed. The kind that can honestly make a fearless moral inventory of himself and his defects and bring them to the one who has the grace, the love, and the power and the authority to ultimately do something about it. After all, did Jesus send this needy man packing for his defective, lacking faith? No! Thankfully, no. His is truly amazing grace. But I'm not quite done yet. Sure, in moments of solitude and healthy reflection, I can and should reach out to God and ask Him for this kind of help with the assurance that I'll be lovingly and kindly received, even when my faith is not perfect. There's no better way to exercise my faith, in fact, to carry out step 3. However, there's yet another piece that's absolutely vital here. I remember during my high school years in the 70s, yeah, I'm old, during the immediate post-Vietnam era and all the turmoil of the late 60s, a movement sprang up in Southern California where I was raised, made up of a lot of ex-hippies, drug addicts, Vietnam vets, and a few surfers that came to be called the Jesus Movement. They met down at Calvary Chapel, Costa Mesa, led by their late pastor, Chuck Smith. And they kept talking about this individual, personal relationship with Jesus. Now, I wasn't a hippie, drug addict, veteran, at least at the time, nor even a surfer. But that personal relationship thing got to me in a good way. And I can't say enough about their ministry as it impacted my own spiritual journey. However, as is pretty typical of humans, we swing from one extreme to another. That emphasis on the individual personal relationship, as good as it was, I'm afraid has sometimes been taken too far at the expense of our need for supportive community. That is, we may have a personal relationship with the God of our understanding, but dare I say, just like with recovery, this faith thing is also a team sport. We need each other. So yes, by all means, take some time in healthy solitude. By the way, solitude, not loneliness, not isolation, solitude. Do that if you will. Connect with the God of your understanding, exercising your faith, but also asking Him to help you with your weak or even lacking faith. After all, He's the one who can deal with it. But don't stop there. Continue to share your faith and struggles in a community of supportive fellow travelers, not just in AA and NA meetings, as good as those are. I hope you all will be doing that. But also in your churches, families, and or circles of friends, as you're beginning to do here at Cumberland Heights, who can then serve as God's means of grace, love, and encouragement to you on your journey of faith, and for whom you may well in turn serve as His means of the same toward them. Indeed, Jesus, I do believe, but I need help with my unbelief. Look around, folks. People just like the ones you're you're looking at right here in this room are likely to be a big part of the answer to that prayer. Let's not cut ourselves off from that blessing. Amen.